I would say that arts integration is curriculum integration. It's no different than science integration or math integration or language arts integration. Arts integration is the same as curriculum integration with any other two subjects. Our problem has been with the arts is that we've always seen the arts as special, as something outside of the curriculum. We've never seen it as a basic. If we begin to see the arts as basic to education, then we have to look at the arts in a whole new way. And then when we integrate the arts, we're seeing that we're bringing the arts in equally to the other subjects. So let's take a minute, let's think about curriculum integration. So if we're bringing any two subjects together, then we have one subject. We say that that subject has to improve the learning in whatever other subjects it's combined with. But the other subjects have to improve the learning in that first subject as well. In other words, it has to be a two-way street. Each subject must improve the learning in the other, or you wouldn't do it. It would be a waste of time. Now that's why people have questions about time. And do I have enough time to teach the arts in my classroom? Because our thinking in this country is that the arts are an add-on. They're something special. They're a drop-off program, and only a special person can teach the arts. And so I take my students and I drop them off where a specialist can teach the arts because they can't happen in the general classroom. That's not the case. The arts are one of the 6 core subjects of learning, and you can bring the arts together, but it means that we have a paradigm shift. We have to think of the arts as a basic and as a core subject, and no longer as that special and that drop-off program. So here's a wonderful metaphor for you with the arts and with integration. If we look at a banana and we see a banana, that might be discipline-based instruction in the arts, when you drop the students off and they're studying an art form. And then we have something in between, which I call the banana split. So if you take that banana and you make a banana split and you put cherries and nuts on the banana split, but you decide you don't like the cherry, you can take the cherries off. And that's where we've been in the arts. If we don't have time to teach the arts, we take the arts off. If we don't have enough money, we take the arts off. But if we took that banana split and we put it into a blender and we blended everything up, there's no way you could remove the cherry or the nuts from that smoothie. And that's curriculum integration. So when we're talking about integrating the arts, it is how do we move from the banana split to the smoothie, to where all of the subjects are blended together. Well, that's the other thing that people think too, is that curriculum integration has to be all the subjects all the time, and that's not the case. Curriculum integration is some of the subjects, some of the time, only when appropriate. What do we mean by appropriate? And then that goes back to when the subjects support each other and when students get the connection between the subjects, because students like to make connections across the curriculum, and that improves understanding, which is what we're after in education. You know, we are in a time of high stakes testing, and the arts right now are falling behind, and that's a shame, because I think for a student or a human to be a well-rounded individual, they need to come out of their education with experiences in the sciences, the humanities, in learning to read and write, and mathematics. I think it's really important that we have well-rounded individuals. There are certain things that the arts really contribute to creating this well-rounded individual. The arts contribute creative thinking and critical thinking. We know that the arts really expand and improve higher order thinking skills, because the arts, when you do the arts, when you participate in the arts, you're not studying something in order to fill in little bubbles on standardized tests. And I always say to people, you know, when I go to a doctor, I don't want someone who knows how to fill in bubbles on a standardized test. I don't want someone operating on me that knows how to answer a multiple choice question. I want someone who is thinking creative and critically. I want someone who can communicate with me. I want someone who can collaborate with me. I want someone who's thinking critically. And the arts do this and support this type of thinking. Now, they're not the only subject that supports this type of thinking. Of course, hands-on science will do the same thing, or what we call problem-based learning will do the same thing. But the arts are one of the basic core subjects. So why not include the arts in a student's education so that they're coming out as a well-rounded individual? One of the questions that I get asked the most often is, how do I get the time? I think this is great. I think everything that you're saying is great, but I just don't have the time to include it in my classroom because I have to cover the curriculum. And I always say, well, are we talking about coverage in education? Are we talking about uncoverage? Are we talking about students learning something, going in depth, or are we talking about just covering the curriculum and not really knowing whether students understand something? So I think that finding the time is a valuable question. I think it's a question that teachers have a right to ask because so much pressure is being put on them. I went into a classroom with a teacher who was teaching the Underground Railroad. And she was teaching it, it was a week's curriculum. And I asked her, what's the biggest problem that you face in teaching the Underground Railroad to second graders for a week? Why so long? And she said to me, well, you know, I still have a tough time because at the end of the week, they think that the Underground Railroad is a train that goes underground. So I said, well, why don't we integrate this with the teaching of drama education? And let's take some drama activities and have the students experience the Underground Railroad rather than just studying the Underground Railroad in traditional methods. At the end of the second day, when we asked the students, what is the Underground Railroad, they could tell us in detail what it was, why it was, how it supported and helped people before the Civil War. It was interesting to the teacher because she said to me, well, now I've done this in 2 days, what do I do with my other 3 days? So it took us a little more time on those days. Her social studies unit was, usually she covered in about 20 minutes a day. We took 2 days, 40 minutes, but at the end of 2 days, not only did they all understand it, but she wasn't going to have to reteach it. They understood it deeply, and she had 3 days of time she could do something else. The research in arts integration and the impact that the arts are having is fairly new. People haven't really cared about the arts and their impact on learning until fairly recently, in about the 1990s, when people started looking at the brain. And they started looking at how do people learn and how does the brain function. And in fact, some people call this now the century of the brain because we're going to learn more about how the human brain functions. So the research really began with that movement because they were finding that the right brain and left brain really worked together. People used to think that if you were creative, you only used one side of your brain, and if you were logical and mathematical, you used the other side of your brain. And now what they know is that the two have to work in harmony. So then people became curious about the arts, and people started doing research. So the research is fairly new. There's a wonderful document out called Critical Links, which looked at many studies, over 60 studies, in how the arts impacted social and emotional and academic development. And there are some really stunning results that have come out from that. We see that students develop in ways that are more social when they have the arts and they participate in the arts. We see that students learn academically at a faster rate when they are participating in the arts. They did some studies where they looked at students' SAT scores, and they've been following students over time, and they have found that students who participate in the arts for 4 or 5 years do better, not only on those standardized tests, but also do better all the way up through graduate school. So we have some results that show us how the arts are impacting those critical and creative skills that we want students to have, and also how they're impacting communication and collaboration, working with peers. So there is some data out there that people can access online as well. There are some books that are being written that include the research. It's not as widely known right now that this work is going on because it is so new. I have been fortunate in my life to have seen the impact of the arts directly on students and on teachers and on schools. And so I've had a fortunate life. In my own classroom, when I was a classroom teacher, I was an English teacher, and I had some students. I had a very, very tough class one year, and I went and I learned something called drama education. And I came back, and of course I was a high school teacher, and most people think of high school teachers as not wanting or being willing to integrate. But I had just learned this thing called creative drama, and I wanted to begin integrating it with this class. I was having a very difficult time with this particular class of juniors. And all of a sudden, my class just blossomed. The whole climate of my classroom changed. And these students that I had been given that were getting C's and D's were all of a sudden getting B's and C's and some A's. And the principal came in to me and he said, "What's going on in your classroom?" Now this was a time before high-stakes testing. This was a time when teachers could really experiment with curriculum, and we weren't using any type of a pacing guide. Principal came in and said, "What's going on in your classroom?" I said, "Well, I don't know. You know, in my world, I was just teaching and using, of course, some different methodology, but I just thought of that as good teaching." And he said, "Well, next year we're giving you the same class, but we're putting it the last period of the day." And they did that because the students didn't cut my class. So here were these students that all of a sudden found learning to be a joy. Their grades were going up, and I discovered the power of the arts in being integrated with the rest of the curriculum. So past that journey, I've been out and working in a lot of schools and working in a lot of K-8 programs in the Chicagoland area, and doing a lot of work in helping teachers integrate the arts. I started with my own art form, which was theater, and integrating theater in the classroom. Of course, that was a joy for me, but then I wanted to learn about the other art forms. I wanted to learn about music and dance and visual arts. And could those art forms have the same impact on students that I was seeing with the dramatic art forms? And of course, the results were similar. I've also had the opportunity in my life to go into schools and begin to work with whole school change in the arts, where schools have wanted to turn around and they have decided they've wanted to become a magnet school for the arts. And I've gone into these particular schools. Now you might think that these schools were from the upper class neighborhoods, but no, most of these schools are from inner city with struggling students, and they have begun to integrate with the arts. I went into a school a couple of years ago in Chicago, and I started working with the 4th and 5th grade teachers in integrating drama with writing. It was very specific. We had looked at the data of the school. We had seen that students were struggling with writing. We chose drama to integrate with that particular academic area. The teachers and I planned together. We created lessons together. And I went in for a number of weeks, 6 to 12 weeks. And the next year, the principal came and she said, we need this woman back in our school because our scores went way up in those grade levels in writing on the state tests. So I've had wonderful experiences where I've gone in that have made me a believer. So it's not just in my looking at data coming from other places, but from my being able to see it firsthand in the classroom. In this particular classroom, I was teaching Of Mice and Men with the students, and they were studying the novel Of Mice and Men. And when we were studying themes in the novel, we were studying character, we were studying conflict, we were studying story elements. And the students, instead of just reading about it, we were getting up and we were enacting, and we were dramatizing the characters, we were pulling out the themes. They were having to do drama activities that would show me that they understood the material rather than just writing me a paper about it. Of course, they had to write the paper too, but they were getting to show me in alternative ways what they understood. What's very interesting about this, kind of a personal story about it, I had one student in that class who had always been given Fs from the time he was in 5th grade. And he was in this classroom and he came in as a very sullen, hating school type of young man. And he ended up getting, I believe, a B from me. It's hard for me to remember the exact grade that he got, and I'm not even concerned about the grade. This is what I'm concerned about. I found him on Facebook about 3 weeks ago, and he and I were writing, and he had down, what is your favorite book of all time? You know, you put on Facebook, you put, what do you read, what's your favorite books? And he had Of Mice and Men is my favorite book. Not only that, he went on to college. I didn't know that he had done that. And he's working as a manager of a store, running a store. Here was a man, a young boy that everybody thought would fail. But because I took the time to integrate in the classroom, here was one life turned around. I come from a community, which is Evanston, Illinois, which is highly supportive of the arts. You mess with the arts in Evanston, you're in big trouble. I think it's one of the reasons I gravitated to Evanston. And the students study the arts. in the schools. We have many arts organizations. We have foundations similar to Patterson that are vibrant within the community. And what they do is it changes the community. It cannot be, the arts cannot be just left to the schools. It cannot be left to arts organizations. It has to be people who really see that the arts are vital to the economic growth of a community, to the spiritual growth of a community, and to the intellectual growth of a community. And that means everybody has to care, about the arts. 87% of Americans say that they want their children to study the arts in school. 87% in a recent study. That means that Americans as a whole see the arts as valuable. But we really haven't turned our communities around, and we haven't turned our schools around to reflect what most Americans want. And that's kind of an irony to me. That here we want something, but perhaps it is that we don't know how to go and get it. We don't know how to do it. I think that's where a foundation like Patterson comes in. Somebody that can lead the way, somebody that can galvanize people, can bring people together to really talk about the arts and facilitate change. And I think it's all about transformation.